Hello everyone, Clifford Bennett, Chief Economist, ACY Securities, and I'm going to try and give you a quick video on the Australian federal budget. Now, this is based on a society as well as business markets perspective. Of course, the first thing to note is that real growth in spending was only 0.6%, and that can be seen as a responsible outcome from the government. There's 15 billion extra to be spent in areas of welfare, with things like the unemployment benefits going up $20 a week for job seekers, and other aspects to welfare all being increased, as well as wage rises for aged care workers. Now, I think all of that is good, but it sounds a big number, 15 billion. But when you get down to the practical implementation of that, what it means is a person on job seeker who's out of work, looking for work. It could be a single mum, it could be a single dad with 2 or 3 kids. They're looking for work. They will get an extra $20 a week. So even if it's just an individual unemployed person, that means on Sunday afternoon, as an exciting party treat for themselves, they could get a takeaway coffee and a takeaway burger and go and have that alone in the park. So it's not life-changing. It means these people stay in poverty. And it is actually a form of punishment for not being in a job. Now, a lot of people agree with that philosophy, but there's a question of degree. And where's the right balance? For instance, Australia, a wonderfully resource-rich nation with lots of billionaires and a population of only 25 million people, has the lowest unemployment benefit payment in the Western world, in the OECD. So that's quite an embarrassment. And it's always been like that. And both governments both sides of government have always persisted in this. And we saw coming out of COVID, after COVID, that the previous Morris government was a bit of a Scrooge as well when it came to this topic. So this is both sides of politics. And I tend to agree with some people, particularly in the social services industry, that it's just not good enough. We don't need to be a country that's wealthy at one end and has impoverished, struggling people at the other end. The pension increase, those sorts of things, or the $15 billion in general, people, business economists are wrong to argue that this style of spending will be inflationary. It won't be. There's nothing inflationary about buying an extra lettuce and carrots at Woolworths. That's not inflationary. What was inflationary was the massive spending in COVID, which resulted in people being able to go out and do, exuberant consumerism. That is inflationary, not the poor being able to have an extra lettuce or bunch of carrots. So that's all a nonsense. So it's not an inflationary budget by any means. Is it? But I still have defended the budget a little bit. But basically what it is the same that we always get. And let's be honest here, not very many people are being honest today. We're overtaxed and, overregulated. And then they give us a little back. And they're supposed to be heroes for doing so. That's the nature of the politics of the modern world. And we see it all over the world, and Australia is no different. But we probably need to do better than that. One of the other things about the budget is it's talking about a surplus, $3 to $4 billion surplus, that is not expected to be sustained, actually. And any suggestions that it will be sustained are a little bit hopeful, except that whilst the Treasurer and the current government have spent $15 billion more on welfare, they actually have a $22 billion windfall from the upward movement and revaluation of commodity prices. So really, they've kept $7 billion from the people. Now, we know that the valuation of commodity prices, global commodity prices, is not something our Australian government has achieved. So they may be taking a little bit more credit than is due in terms of there being a surplus. and they are helping all the people who need help, but in a way that makes almost no difference to them, except that in budget papers in an Excel spreadsheet, it sounds like a big number. So the societal impact is appreciated, but it's nowhere near enough. And it doesn't offset the cost of living that has gone on in rents and energy and food that we've all experienced. But those who are less privileged at the moment, socioeconomically, they really struggle to deal with all of this. And even working families are struggling with higher mortgage costs or higher rents for a home that will accommodate their children as well, higher education costs, and the list goes on. So inflation, yes, is a major problem. What can the federal government do about it? Well, the most important thing the federal government can do about it is remove the sitting RBA board, governor and board, which they are about to do. And I don't think Lowe will be reappointed. How could you? That would be such a further embarrassment to the nation internationally. But I think probably we are going to see the appointment of that expert panel over the next 2 to 3 months. There's questions about whether it needs to be passed through Parliament before it can happen, or if there's a way that the regulatory environment can appoint that panel for the time being. So that remains to be seen how quickly that can be done. But that is the most important thing in terms of the fight against inflation. And what I mean there is an expert panel coming into the RBA should not be hiking interest rates. So the RBA should be on hold because inflation is so extreme and of such a different character to what it has been historically that it will be self-defeating if you leave it alone. But if you raise interest rates to fight it, you will just further feed this kind of inflation. So, and also consumers and businesses are already being hammered. They're struggling. They don't need any more interest rate hikes, as well as all the existing higher price structures they're currently dealing with. And so the RBA should not be hiking, but so hopefully that a new expert panel will realize that, and that will come into being in the not too distant future. So that's probably the best thing this government could have done. In the budget, I think, I would have done it differently, but we're all different, aren't we? I think the budget can be applauded for being a responsible government, but for me, it gets a fail overall because it did a little bit, but not enough. So the problems the economy is facing are largely not of this government. They are largely of the Morrison government overspend and the RBA ridiculous interest rate settings for low levels and then promising and then hiking aggressive. It's a schmozzle. So the government may not have created these problems, but it certainly is in a position to deal with these problems. It has the power to deal with these problems. And on that front, I think it's failed because it's made good efforts, but I'm not sure whether to use the word token or good. Token to good efforts to help offset the cost of living crisis for those people who have no other means to recover this increase in cost of living. And the other thing is, why do we never talk about the fuel excise tax? It is the most insidious, even criminal, but I shouldn't use that word, but it's the most insidious tax in Australia's history. The disproportionate impact on welfare recipients, the disproportionate impact on working families, the disproportionate impact even on the middle class to some degree is mind-boggling. The poorer you are, the bigger the percentage of your income that goes to paying this excise tax. And what are you paying a tax for? To be able to, the fuel excise tax, to be able to drive your car, to maybe take children to school or to sporting events, to drive your car to work and back. If you're a self-employed tradie, to run your vehicle, to do your work. And if, let's imagine a luxury. You want to actually go to the beach on the weekend from the western suburbs of Sydney, for instance, and other locations around Australia. That's quite a trek in tolls and excise fuel tax. I mean, one of the biggest things we could do to fight inflation is completely remove permanently this insidious regressive tax on the poor. It's completely unreasonable and unjustified. So there are other things to do. The other thing is there's $9 billion for submarines, but it's only the first year payment of us joining the US fleet, our submarines. We're basically going to integrate them with the US and the UK fleets, and they will be thus controlled by NATO. Influences, not specifically NATO, but US, UK influences. And we're paying overall $368 billion to give away our sovereignty of our submarine force. And of course, we're doing that because we feel there could be a conflict in the Asian economic region. But I won't go into this too much, but it doesn't make any sense at all. It doesn't stack up to logic. It stacks up in emotion for a lot of people, but it doesn't stack up in logic, because we want to protect our trade routes is why the Minister for Defence would argue we need this expenditure. But our trade routes are predominantly with the person or nation that we're thinking we could be in a conflict with. So how does that work? I don't think going into conflict with them is actually going to protect our trade with them. I don't think that will happen. And also, it means a long-term degradation of the trading relationship, even without a conflict. So there's another big sum of money that I'm all for defence spending and a strong Australian posture, and a strong, sovereign, independent Australian defence posture. But I do think we've probably overstepped in wanting to have a nuclear submarine fleet as a nation of 25 million people. Okay, so they're the other issues with the budget that aren't getting the headlines. The predominant issues are, did they spend $15 billion and that's going to be inflationary? And I've seen people getting really passionate, yelling and screaming about it's going to be so inflationary. And it's not going to be inflationary at all. Sorry, it's not. 0.6% growth in real spending, not very inflationary at all. The fact that we're benefiting from the global commodity price uplift just goes to show what a lucky country we are and why so much of our good fortune is actually out of our hands and to some extent God-given, and yet we continue to pat ourselves on the back for it. So I think after this budget, there will need to be far more reflection on just what the nature of how we raise revenue and distribute funds within Australia is conducted. Of course, there's a $9,000 reduction in tax for the rich, but do they really need it? But is the tax level onerous? Yes. The reason why I'm saying they don't really need it isn't because they're rich. They don't really need it because they already legally get around the tax system anyway. So I'm sure they're saving far more than $9,000 in the first place. So it's kind of a redundant action, but it is reasonable that all tax rates in Australia need to be lower. In fact, the highest income tax rate in Australia should be 20%. The highest company tax rate in Australia should be 20%, but maybe the GST should be 20% because everyone's going to have so much more money in their pockets they can afford the higher GST. And then all those people who illegally avoid paying tax will actually have to pay some tax. Wouldn't that be a whole lot fairer for the Australian nation as a whole? Look, we do need to support people who are out of work, looking for work, or have a disability, people who genuinely deserve welfare. They do not deserve to be in poverty and hang their heads in shame every day. So I wish that 15 billion was 30 billion and it wouldn't have been inflationary either. Clifford Bennett, Chief Economist, ACY Securities.